Hi, what a great tech festival. I'm super excited to be here and thanks for being here with us today. For the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about building API experiences your developers love. My name is Pratham. I'm a developer relations manager at API Layer. I have been around APIs for a while, ever since I started working professionally. That's why for the next couple of minutes, I decided to talk about this topic. Let's dive into it. So there are a couple of things that are on the stake and what's the problem why we are talking about it. If you see APIs, they are not like a typical framework where you can win developers with some flashy UI. You have to be more precise at each level of API lifecycle or developers touchpoint if you want to gain their trust and keep the developers going to use our APIs. Moving forward, the next slide I have is basically the touchpoints every developer has in their API lifecycle. The first is, of course, discover, followed by explore, integrate, and operate. The entire presentation I keep in a question-based format, so you can ask questions to yourself at each step in order to find whether you are providing optimal experiences to your developers or not. For example, under operate, you can say, if a particular request failed, whether we provide developer observability to the audience where they can track back and see which requests get failed and what's the best resources to actually fix them. So this is how you can basically get an idea about what's wrong or what sort of improvements you need to make the better optimal experience. Moving forward, how I envision this or how I see this is basically into 4 dimensions, which are, the first one is platform, the second is usability, followed by reliability and empathy. Most of the API providers I notice, they basically think that if you provide SDKs or maybe MCPs in AI era or comprehensive document, they will be good. But I think this is just the bare minimum you can do if you are an API provider. You have to do much more. Like, for example, when you start planning your APIs in the API developer lifecycle, you have to be more precise from the first step. For example, in the platform, you have to think about cognitive ergonomics, where you have to make your APIs more intuitive and predictable. Similar with the reliability case, if you provide developer observability where they can track back each request, that would be a great idea to improve the experience. Let's deep dive into these 4 dimensions one by one because there's a lot to talk about. The first one is, of course, platform. When you start designing or planning your APIs, you have to think that what sort of or what type of developers will going to use it. And according to that, you have to choose the constraint or principle. I know most of the APIs these days are kindly based on REST, which is a great thing. So whenever you start planning or designing your API, you have to think from a developer mental model. The second thing I would like to emphasize here is basically favor predictability. Always going to choose the predictable semantics where, for example, post should do what post verb is meant to be. And similar with the errors, developers actually love error. They don't hate errors if they are actionable and provide better resources. Some of the examples I have here is, for example, bad error. This is how a typical bad error will look like, which says error invalid inputs and no resources at all. But on the other hand, on the right hand side, if you see, the good error is basically give you all the hints and right resources to head over to in order to resolve that error, which definitely provide way better experience to your developers. Moving forward to the next dimension I have here is usability, of course. And I think most of the API providers focus on this part only, where they think that if they provide SDK or comprehensive documentation, they will be good. But I think that's the bare minimum you can do as the API provider. You have to do other 100 things along with SDKs and other stuff in order to gain the developer's interest. Of course, we need to optimize the time to hello world in the onboarding process. You need to ask some of the question whether your API has 7 level of authentication. If you provide, let's say, some sort of payment APIs, then it would be fine. But in that way, to provide the good onboarding flow, you have to have some sort of sandboxing environments or demo keys where they can get started real quick without setting up the actual production ready infrastructure. Similar questions you may ask, like, do you have sandboxing environment? Do you have SDKs or maybe MCPs in the AI world? And you will be able to hit this dimension in a good way. The third dimension I have here is reliability. And I think most of us API providers forgot to optimize this dimension, which is very great. Most of us, what we think is that reliability is just a high uptime and low latency, which is not true. I think it's just the 10% of the reliability part. One very important law here is Tesla's law, which says that there is some sort of complexity which you cannot delete. There's two ways here. You can either pass that complexity to the development phase, or you can pass that complexity to the users who are going to use your APIs. If, for example, some of your endpoints have best optimal latency of 0.5 millisecond, I would say just be honest with your developer audience that if you're going to use XYZ endpoint, you're always going to get this much of latency, which is very great. If you be honest with your developers, you will definitely gain their interest. Some of the features I have seen, or some of the anti-patterns I have seen in the existing APIs, is basically when they combine multiple endpoints into one, they forgot to provide better runway or some sort of migration guide which can help existing user to migrate to some other endpoints or parameters basically. So if you want to gain the trust of developers, you have to provide a better deprecation runway with some sort of migrations. Again, you can ask some questions here to yourself if you want to optimize this dimension, whether you have developer telemetry, whether you have some sort of change log or health score page where developers can see what is broken and what's working correctly. Moving forward, the next and final dimension I have in this API developer experience is empathy, which is again very interesting because here, if you're building APIs, you have to think like a developers. You have to think what they are going to do with your APIs, what sort of right use cases they're going to hit with your APIs. At API layer, what we do, we have a monthly integration challenge where we try to integrate our APIs in this product from scratch, which will help us identifying all the necessary complexity which we have added unwillingly because of the product improvements. This helps us finding some of the loopholes in the onboarding process as well as integration part 2. Again, some of the questions we ask, whether your docs talks to human. I know every content these days are basically AI or ChatGPT generated, which is fine as soon as it hits the human language and be more comprehensive and intuitive. And again, the very important question here in this dimension, if I had to integrate this API under a deadline, what sort of complexity I will get and how I can make the life of developers easier. With that being said, I have listed some of the tangible components here which you can hit in each dimension. For example, platform, of course, most of the APIs, I think 50% of the APIs these days does not have open API specs or contracts, which is okay. I mean, if you are providing some sort of documentation from other way, which is fine, but for making your APIs AI ready, you have to do these kind of things, cognitive design under platform, hate US implemented so that developers or maybe agents can get to know what is the next resource and what's the right path moving forward. Under usability, of course, you can have Postman collection, you can have SDKs, NPM packages, some sort of use cases, sandboxing environment and stuff. Under reliability, which is, I think most of the API providers missed. Again, I said that. So under reliability, you can have developer telemetry, some sort of observability platforms where developer can go back to their request and see what's wrong and what went right. And final one is, of course, empathy, where you can run monthly integrations day so that you will get to know what are the loopholes in the process and make sure you convey the complexity of your APIs to the developers in the right way so that they get to know what's right in there. With that being said, I think it's time to wrap it up. And again, thanks for being here with us today.